The story of Oak Alley Villa. Tonight, let us cross the boundaries of the real world into dark lands where lost souls and terrifying secrets reside. Secrets that mortal men cannot comprehend. The tale of Oak Alley Mansion is not merely a majestic historical relic, but a crossroads between two worlds, where the line between life and death is thinner than ever. Under the cruel moonlight and dense darkness, Oak Alley Mansion emerges like a colossal phantom, hidden among ancient oak trees and the frigid Mississippi River. Here, time seems to stand still, giving way to mournful whispers, lurking ghosts, and a curse that lingers forever. The Johnson family, seeking peace, made a fatal mistake when they decided to move to Oak Alley Mansion. Little did they know, they were opening the gates of hell, inviting uncontrollable evil forces into their home. John, the father, burdened with heavy financial pressures, hoped the ancient mansion would be a sanctuary for his soul. Mary, the mother, placed her faith in the fresh country air to heal her emotional wounds. Michael, the eldest son, with a sensitive artistic spirit, yearned to find creative inspiration in the mansion's melancholy beauty. And Eleanor, the youngest daughter, with a fragile heart, unwittingly stepped into the vortex of fate, becoming the target of dark forces. On their housewarming night, in the second-floor bedroom, Eleanor tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The window opened to the balcony, welcoming the night breeze from the Mississippi River. But the room remained stuffy and suffocating. The waning crescent moon cast shadows across the room, elongating objects into grotesque shapes on the walls. The large antique mirror, facing the bed, reflected Eleanor's pale, lost image in the darkness, like a wandering soul lost in the underworld. From the garden, the cold whistling wind, passing through the oak trees, echoed into the room like the mournful cries of nameless spirits. Eleanor felt an icy chill seeping into her bones, raising goosebumps all over her body. The musty, ancient dust mixed with a strange, indescribable, but extremely unpleasant scent, like the faint odor of rotting corpses, making Eleanor nauseous and breathless. In the terrifying silence, Eleanor began to hear strange sounds, soft creaking from the wooden floor beneath her feet, the script of the old wardrobe door, a light sigh as if someone were hiding in the room, sighing beside her. But when Eleanor opened her eyes and looked around, the room was empty, filled only with darkness and eerie silence. In the early hours of the morning, as the last wave of drowsiness arrived, Eleanor was startled awake by a piercing sound. A heart-wrenching scream echoed throughout the mansion, tearing through the quiet night. The terrifying sound made Eleanor's blood run cold, her skin prickling with goosebumps. Her heart raced, her breath quickened, and her body trembled as if she had caught a fever. Eleanor quickly turned on the bedside lamp, jumped out of bed, and ran into the hallway. The scream seemed to come from the living room downstairs. Eleanor anxiously rushed downstairs, calling out to her parents. But when she reached the living room, the scene before her froze her in place. The room was still dark and silent, without a soul, without a sign of anything amiss. Only the cold moonlight, shining through the large window, cast long shadows on the old sofas and the antique crystal chandelier. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind blew in from the window, carrying a strong, unpleasant scent, the scent of white jasmine mixed with the stench of fresh blood. Making Eleanor gag. In the still night, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of the room echoed slowly and steadily, like a countdown to death. Eleanor trembled, stepping back, feeling clearly that an invisible force was lurking in the shadows, watching her from every corner of the room. In the days that followed, the Johnson family's life at Oak Alley Mansion gradually turned into a series of haunting, terrifying days. Supernatural phenomena occurred more frequently and violently. Furniture moved on its own. Objects fell and broke for no apparent reason. Doors opened and closed automatically. The antique piano in the music room played wordless, mournful melodies on its own. At night, in the long, dark corridors, shadows flickered past, cold sighs echoed from afar, and stealthy footsteps followed behind, making one's hair stand on end. Especially, Eleanor became the main target of the invisible forces. She was constantly haunted by terrifying nightmares, in which she found herself lost in a gloomy oak garden, chased by a female ghost with a pale face and hollow black eyes. The ghost's mournful lullaby echoed in her ears, haunting her even when she was awake. When she looked in the mirror, Eleanor no longer recognized herself. Her reflection became distorted and grotesque. Her face deformed, her hair falling out in clumps, her skin pale and lifeless, like a soulless corpse. The eyes in the mirror were not Eleanor's, but the eyes of the female ghost, staring at her with hatred and bloodlust. One late afternoon, Eleanor was sitting alone in her bedroom when she felt a cold gust of wind blowing in. Even though the window was closed, the surrounding air became stuffy and suffocating. Eleanor felt a chill down her spine, as if someone was standing right behind her. She cautiously turned around and froze when she saw it. On the old armchair in the corner of the room, a faint shadow was slowly appearing. The shadow grew larger, taller, gradually taking on a human form. And when the shadow fully materialized, Eleanor was horrified to see that it was a female ghost with a pale, bloodless face, hollow black eyes, and disheveled hair covering her face. The ghost stood silently, staring at Eleanor with cold, lifeless eyes, like a walking corpse. Eleanor was terrified, unable to speak, her limbs weak and immobile. The ghost slowly raised her hand. Her thin, pale, unusually long fingers with black, sharp nails like demon claws. The ghostly hand slowly reached towards Eleanor, as if to strangle her. In that critical moment, when despair seemed to lead to certain death, Eleanor suddenly remembered the silver crucifix her mother had given her before they moved to the mansion. She always wore it around her neck as a talisman. Without hesitation, Eleanor quickly raised the crucifix towards the ghost, as if struck by a powerful electric shock. The ghost let out a terrifying scream, her face twisted in pain, her body trembling violently, and then slowly dissolving into the air, leaving behind only a trail of black smoke and a foul stench. Eleanor escaped death by a hair's breadth, but her heart was still pounding, cold sweat pouring down her face. Her whole body was weak and exhausted. She collapsed to the floor, unconscious. When she awoke, Eleanor found herself in the hospital, with her parents and brother beside her. They all looked worried and weary. It turned out that after Eleanor fainted, the ghost did not relent. It continued to haunt the bedroom, causing terrifying noises that frightened the entire Johnson family. Eleanor's father broke down the door and found her unconscious on the floor. In a panic, he rushed her to the hospital. Doctors diagnosed Eleanor with severe physical exhaustion due to mental panic and severe sleep deprivation. But Eleanor knew that the real cause was not that simple. She had faced a supernatural force far beyond the explanation of science. After being discharged from the hospital, Eleanor decided to leave Oak Alley Mansion forever. The Johnson family no longer had any attachment to the place. They sold the mansion for a pittance and moved to a distant city, starting a new life. But the terrifying memories of Oak Alley Mansion haunted Eleanor forever. In her sleep, she often dreamed of the female ghost with her pale face, hollow black eyes, and the mournful lullaby echoing in her ears. The whispers from the Mississippi River still lingered. Like an unresolvable curse, Oak Alley Mansion stood tall, weathering the years, witnessing tragedy after tragedy, and continuing to spread terror to those who dared to trespass into the realm of the wronged spirits. And the story of Oak Alley Mansion is still told by the locals, passed down through generations, as a reminder of the existence of invisible forces and the inexplicable mysteries of the spiritual world. Remember, sometimes there are places we are better off avoiding, because the darkness there can swallow your soul without you even realizing it. Story 2. Nightmare by the Blood River, Maine, 1995. It was 1995, a sweltering summer, in a peaceful little town called Havenwood, in the state of Maine. There flowed a river. They called it Blood River. Just hearing the name sent chills down your spine. But few knew that the name was not just a random coincidence. This story is about Emily, a young girl who loved to explore, and her close-knit group of friends, James, Sarah, Michael, Jessica, and David, 6 friends in total, decided to have a weekend camping trip by the Blood River to enjoy nature and escape the noise of the city. Emily, who was the one who suggested this idea, she heard rumors that Blood River had a pristine, mysterious beauty, and especially, it was very deserted, rarely visited, perfect for a quiet camping trip. But Emily had no idea that tranquility concealed a terrifying secret. Friday afternoon, the group piled their gear into James's old Jeep. Laughter echoed, mixed with music from the radio. They drove along a bumpy dirt road, through lush green pine forests. The air was fresh, faintly scented with pine resin, and the birds chirped merrily. All of it seemed to herald a joyful trip. As the sun began to set, they arrived at the bank of Blood River. A scene unfolded before their eyes. Breathtakingly beautiful, the river snaked, flowing between towering cliffs, the water crystal clear, reflecting the crimson sunset. Surrounding them were ancient trees, their roots gnarled and clinging to the cliffs, creating a beauty that was both majestic and wild. They quickly set up camp, started a fire, and began preparing dinner. The sound of the river flowing gently, the crackling of firewood, the laughter of friends, created a warm and comfortable atmosphere. It seemed all worries and troubles had vanished. When night fell, darkness enveloped the forest. The campfire became the only source of light. Dispelling the darkness, they sat around together, grilling meat, drinking beer, and telling ghost stories, like any other camping trip. Michael, who was a fan of telling ghost stories, began to speak. He told local legends about Blood River, about wronged spirits, about mysterious disappearances. Michael's storytelling became increasingly gruesome, making the atmosphere tenser. Sarah, a timid girl, began to feel scared. She said, "Michael, stop it. Don't tell anymore. I'm getting chills all over my spine." Michael laughed loudly. "Ha ha. Scared already? Sarah, it's just a ghost story. They're not real." But deep inside, Sarah felt something was wrong. Suddenly, the campfire flared up fiercely. then abruptly went out. Darkness engulfed everything. Laughter ceased. Silence fell, leaving only the sound of wind whistling through leaves and the rushing blood river. In the silent darkness, that sound was terrifying. David tried to relight the fire, but the lighter wouldn't work. He muttered, "Damn it. Why did it run out of fluid at this moment?" Jessica took out a flashlight and shone it around. The flashlight's weak beam was only enough to illuminate a small area. Darkness seemed thicker, enveloping them. In the dim darkness, Emily felt a gaze, watching them from the dense forest. She shuddered and whispered, "Does anyone see anything?" James looked in the direction Emily pointed, but only saw pitch blackness. He reassured, "It's probably just your imagination, Emily. Don't worry too much." But Emily knew that she wasn't imagining it. That feeling of being watched was very real, very clear, as if someone was standing right behind her, panting, breathing cold air on her neck. The sound of the river suddenly became louder, as if the river was raging. Strange noises began to emerge from the forest, the sound of branches breaking with a snap, the rustling of leaves, heavy footsteps, as if someone was approaching. The whole group listened in silence, hearts pounding in their chests, cold sweat pouring down their foreheads. Fear spread rapidly in the air. Jessica trembled and asked, "Is anyone there?" No one answered. Only the howling wind and the river's roar replied to her. Then a sound, horrifying, rang out, tearing through the silent night. A blood-curdling scream of pain echoed from the forest. That scream lingered, then fell silent, leaving behind an even more terrifying silence. Everyone froze solid. No one dared to breathe heavily. No one dared to move. They knew that something bad had happened. Emily tried to regain her composure. She said, her voice trembling, We should go back to the tent." Everyone agreed immediately. No one wanted to stay here for another second. They hastily packed up their gear, hands and feet trembling. Flashlight beams shone erratically. In the darkness, they tried to find their way back to the campsite. But it seemed they were lost. The forest became different. The trees seemed taller, more menacing. Darkness, thicker, enveloping them. No escape. Footsteps continued to sound behind them, getting closer, faster, as if someone was chasing them, determined not to let go. They started to run, ran for their lives, through the dense forest. Thorns scratched at their skin, tripped, scrambled to get up, and kept running. In the pitch-black darkness, they didn't know where they were running to. They only knew that they had to run, had to escape this place. While running, David tripped on a root and fell. He shouted, "Help me!" James turned back to help David. But at that very moment, something from above swooped down and struck David hard. A horrific scream rang out again, then went silent. James recoiled in horror. His flashlight beam shone on the spot where David had fallen. But David was nowhere to be seen. Only a pool of fresh blood, crimson red, spreading on the ground. James screamed in terror. "David! Where's David?" No one answered. Only the howling wind and the river's roar echoed back, as if mocking his helplessness. Jessica wailed, "No way! David, no way!" She collapsed, burying her face in her hands and sobbing. Sarah, also terrified, collapsed beside Jessica. The two girls hugged each other, trembling, unable to speak. Emily tried to remain calm. She knew that they couldn't break down. They had to keep running. Had to survive. She said, her voice resolute. Get up. We have to keep going. There's no time left. Michael also nodded in agreement. His face pale, drained of all blood. The remaining four continued to run in the pitch-black darkness. They didn't know where they were running to. They only knew that they had to run, had to escape this ghostly forest. But it seemed the forest didn't want to let them go. Strange noises continued to follow them, getting closer, faster, and more terrifying. Suddenly, before them, appeared a deep, bottomless chasm. No way out. They were cornered. Emily looked around in despair. Darkness engulfed everything. Not a ray of light. Not a glimmer of hope. She knew that this might be the end. From within the darkness, a voice echoed, whispered, gruesome, as if from hell. You cannot escape. Blood River. Then, from the bottom of the chasm, a bony, pale white hand reached up, grabbed Sarah's leg, and dragged her down into the abyss. Sarah screamed in terror. Her scream echoed in the dark night, then went silent. Jessica, witnessing that horrific scene, fainted on the spot. Emily and James were terrified beyond measure. They knew that they couldn't save Sarah, and perhaps they couldn't escape this place either. Michael, as if driven mad, he rushed towards the chasm, shouting, "Monster, what do you want from us? Take me instead of my friends." Then, he jumped into the chasm, committing suicide to save his friends. Emily and James stood frozen by the edge of the chasm, witnessing the scene of their friends dying tragically one by one. They felt despair and helplessness more than ever. Then, once again, the gruesome voice echoed from within the darkness. Blood River needs blood. Emily understood everything. Blood River was not just an ordinary river. It was a living entity, a bloodthirsty monster. It wanted blood. It wanted the souls of those who trespassed on its territory. James knelt down, wailing, clutching his head in despair. Emily also felt her strength draining. She knew that they had no chance of survival. But at that moment, in despair, Emily suddenly remembered the warning of an old woman they met on the way here. That old woman had said, "Stay away from Blood River. There is something evil there." That warning, like a ray of light, flashed in the desperate darkness. Emily grabbed James's hand, pulled him to his feet. She said, her voice weak, "James, we have to run, have to escape from here before dawn." James blankly stared at Emily, his eyes empty, lifeless. But Emily didn't give up. She pulled James and continued to run, running towards the faint light at the end of the forest. Hope was slim, but still there. They ran non-stop until the dawn broke, dispelling the darkness. The forest gradually appeared in the morning light, no longer as terrifying as last night. They escaped the forest, exhausted, collapsing by the roadside. Looking back, the forest remained silent, mysterious, as if nothing had ever happened. But in the minds of Emily and James, the nightmare by Blood River would forever be a scar that would never heal. They had lost their friends, lost their youth, and lost their peace of mind. And to this day, people still rumored that Blood River is still there, still flowing fiercely, still waiting for the next prey, those who dared to trespass on its territory. On new moon nights, when darkness prevails and the river is dyed a terrifying, blood red. Do you believe in this story? Perhaps you might think that it's just a ghost story, made up to scare children. But if one day you have the chance to visit Havenwood, Maine, try it once. Come to the bank of Blood River on a new moon night and listen to the howling wind, the river's roar, and feel the coldness enveloping you. Maybe you'll change your mind and remember that sometimes the most terrifying ghost stories are not fiction, but things that are real, lurking deep in the darkness, waiting to devour us. Story 3. Sleepless Night at the Hawthorne Hotel, Vermont, 2003. It was 2003. Autumn in Vermont. The maple leaves turned a fiery red. The entire town of Hawthorne was immersed in a melancholic and ancient beauty, but few knew that behind that peaceful facade lay hidden dark and terrifying secrets. This story tells of John, a young man working in marketing. He received orders for a business trip to Hawthorne to meet an important client. This trip, for John, was just a tedious work procedure. He had no idea that it would turn into a nightmare night, haunting him for the rest of his life. John drove alone on a deserted highway. On both sides of the road were towering maple trees, yellow leaves falling gently. The scenery was as beautiful as a painting, but John's heart did not feel comfortable at all. He had a bad feeling about this trip. As dusk began to fall, John arrived at Hawthorne. The town was smaller than he imagined. The streets were deserted. Most of the shops were closed. Only a few faint yellow lights shone from the ancient houses, creating long and distorted shadows. On the sidewalk, the Hawthorne Hotel, where John had booked a room, was located at the end of Main Street. A dilapidated 3-story building, Victorian architecture, painted in an old ivory white. It looked more like a haunted castle than a normal hotel. The hotel sign had peeling paint, only faintly showing the words Hawthorne Hotel since 1888. The year of establishment made John shiver. Entering the hotel lobby, John felt a gust of cold air rush over him, even though it wasn't cold outside. The hotel lobby was pitch black. Only a small desk lamp, placed on the reception desk, emitted a dim yellow light, highlighting the peeling walls and the layer of dust covering the furniture. The reception desk was unattended. John called out loudly, "Hello? Is anyone there?" The echo reverberated in the silent lobby, making the atmosphere even more eerie. After a moment, from behind the desk, an elderly man emerged, slow in demeanor, his face wrinkled, and his eyes deep set, looking at John with suspicion. The old man introduced himself as George, the hotel manager. His voice was hoarse and slow, like a whisper. He handed John the key to room 304 on the 3rd floor and said, "Your room is at the end of the hallway. Top floor. If you need anything, just call me. But here, at night, there's usually no one at the switchboard." Quote, John took the key, thanked George, and dragged his suitcase upstairs. The wooden stairs creaked under his feet. Each step seemed heavier. The 3rd floor hallway was endlessly long. Dim light shone from the ancient wall lamps, creating shadows, dancing on the walls. On both sides of the hallway were closed room doors, silent, without a sound. Finding room 304, John inserted the key into the lock. The old wooden door opened with difficulty. The room was small and old. The furniture was simple, just a single bed, a small desk, a wardrobe, and an old armchair. The room's window overlooked the back of the hotel, where there was a desolate garden and an ancient cemetery. The smell of mildew and dust rushed into John's nose. The air in the room was stuffy and unpleasant. Natural light hardly penetrated. The room was dark and gloomy, more like a cellar than a hotel room. John sighed, put down his suitcase, and sat on the bed. He felt tired and bored. This business trip, indeed, was not at all interesting. He opened his laptop, intending to work a bit, but his mind could not focus. The strange atmosphere of this hotel made him feel uneasy and uncomfortable. He decided to take a shower to relax a bit. The bathroom was tiny and old. The tiles were yellow. The faucet was rusty. The bathtub was grimy. John shuddered when he touched the cold water, even though he had turned the hot water tap all the way up. While showering, John felt someone was watching him from behind. He spun around, but saw no one, only the gray shower curtain swaying slightly in the breeze coming through the window crack. He told himself it was probably because he was too tired, that he was hallucinating. Having showered, John felt a little better. He got dressed and stepped out of the bathroom. But just as he stepped out, he froze, stunned by the scene before his eyes. His suitcase had been opened wide. Clothes and belongings were scattered all over the floor, as if someone had rummaged through and ransacked his things. John panicked, rushed to check his suitcase. He didn't see anything missing, but the feeling of unease in his heart increased even more. Who had entered his room, and why rummage through his belongings? Manager George, or someone else? Quote, he locked the room door carefully and began to tidy up his belongings. While tidying, he listened to all the sounds around him. The hallway outside remained silent, without a sound, only the wind whistling outside the window and the sound of water flowing gently from somewhere, echoing. When he finished tidying up, John felt hungry. He decided to go down to the lobby to find something to eat. But when he opened the room door and stepped out into the hallway, he flinched, terrified, when he saw the hallway was no longer the familiar hallway he had just walked through. The hallway became longer, endlessly long. The light dimmer. The room doors on both sides of the hallway were no longer ordinary wooden doors, but transformed into iron doors, rusty, tightly locked, looking like prison doors. The air became colder, stuffier. The smell of mildew and fishy odor rushed into John's nose. He felt short of breath and nauseous. He had the feeling that he was lost in another place, not the Hawthorne Hotel, where he had just been. John trembled, walking down the hallway, trying to find his way back to the stairs. But the further he walked, the hallway became longer, without end. The iron doors on both sides of the hallway remained silent, menacing, like eyes watching him in the darkness. Suddenly, from the end of the hallway, a sound echoed softly, then gradually louder. A footstep, slow, heavy, as if someone was approaching him from the darkness. John's heart pounded in his chest. Cold sweat poured down his forehead. He knew that there was no one else in this hotel except for him and manager George. So, whose footsteps were those? He stopped abruptly, holding his breath to listen. The footsteps got closer and closer, heavier and heavier, like the footsteps of a giant. approaching. From the darkness, he could feel the ground vibrating slightly under his feet. Then, from the darkness, a dark shape gradually emerged, tall, distorted, faintly visible in the dim light. That dark shape had no clear form. It was just a black mass, huge, approaching him, slowly and terrifyingly. John screamed in terror and backed away. He wanted to run away, but his legs were as if rooted to the ground. Unable to move, he felt his whole body paralyzed. Without any strength, the dark shape came closer and closer. It emitted a strange sound, gruesome, like groans, growls, gasps for breath, mixed together. That sound was like echoing from hell, making John feel terrified beyond measure. When the dark shape came very close to him, John could see more clearly its form. It was not a human, but a bizarre, hideous creature. It was tall, pitch black, without a face, only long tentacles, wriggling, reaching out from its body. That creature raised its tentacles, reaching towards John. Those tentacles were elongated, trembling, and slimy, like giant leeches. They emitted a weird, bluish-green light, making John feel disgusted and horrified. John closed his eyes, screamed in terror. He waited for the worst to happen, but nothing happened. Only silence enveloped him. He peeked his eyes open. Looking around, the dark shape had disappeared. The hallway had also returned to normal. No longer the scary prison hallway, but the familiar hotel hallway. The light had also become brighter, warmer. He breathed a sigh of relief, wiped sweat from his forehead. He told himself it was probably because he was too stressed and tired that he had hallucinated. It was all just a fleeting nightmare. But deep inside, John knew that what he had just experienced was not a hallucination, not a nightmare. It was real, very real, and it was still there, lurking in the darkness of the Hawthorne Hotel. He decided to return to his room, not daring to go anywhere else. He locked the room door, fastened the latch carefully, and sat on the bed, turning on the bright lights. He tried to work, to forget what had just happened, but his mind was still not at peace. He kept looking at the door, listening to every sound outside, the wind whistling, water flowing, branches breaking. All of it made him feel uneasy and scared. He had the feeling as if someone was lurking outside the room door, waiting to break in at any moment. Suddenly, a knock on the door rang out, softly but firmly, making John jump. His heart as if stopped beating. He held his breath to listen. The knock on the door rang out again and again, becoming more and more insistent. John trembled and asked, "Who is it?" No one answered. Only the knock on the door continued to ring out, steadily and terrifyingly, like a call to souls from hell. He tried to calm down, stepped out to open the door, but just as he touched the doorknob, the knock on the door abruptly stopped, fell silent. He opened the door. The hallway outside remained deserted, dark, not a soul in sight. He looked around, not seeing anyone. Only darkness and silence enveloped him. He closed the door, leaned his back against the door, panting. He knew that he was not safe at all. In this hotel, there was something very scary, wanting to harm him. As the night wore on, the air became even colder. Strange noises appeared more and more in the room and outside the hallway. Footsteps, whispers, giggles, sounds of furniture falling, all of it echoed back in the dark night, as if mocking John's fear. The lights in the room suddenly flickered continuously, then went out. Darkness engulfed John. He hastily turned on his phone's flashlight, shining it around, but the flashlight's weak beam could not dispel the darkness, but only made it even more terrifying. In the dim darkness, John felt someone was in his room. Not one person, but many people. He could hear soft breaths, rustling sounds, stirring sounds, as if someone was moving around him. In the darkness, he shuddered when he felt a cold hand touch his shoulder, then another hand touch his back, then another hand touch his leg. Those invisible hands were caressing, fondling his body in a gruesome way. John screamed in terror, struggling, trying to escape the invisible hands. But the more he struggled, those hands tightened even more. They squeezed his body, making him feel suffocated and in pain. He tried to crawl out of bed to escape, but when he just touched his feet to the floor suddenly became slippery, like ice. He slipped, fell to the floor, hitting his head hard on the ground. His consciousness gradually blurred and vanished. When he woke up, John found himself lying on the bed. Morning light shone through the window. The room had returned to normal, no longer dark and cold like last night. He breathed a sigh of relief, telling himself it was all just a dream. Too terrible. He sat up, checked his body, not feeling any pain. He got out of bed, went into the bathroom, washed his face, looked in the mirror. But when he looked in the mirror, he flinched, horrified, when he saw his face was no longer the familiar face. In the mirror, reflected back, a pale, haggard face, dark circles under his eyes, and lifeless. On his forehead appeared bruises and scratch marks, as if he had just gone through a horrific battle. John panicked, touched his face. The bruises and scratch marks were real, very real. He knew that what he had experienced last night was not a dream, but the truth. Horrifying and terrifying. He hastily packed up his belongings, checked out of the room, and left the Hawthorne Hotel, not daring to linger for another second. He drove frantically, leaving Hawthorne as if fleeing from a demon, chasing after him. On the way back, John constantly looked in the rearview mirror. He still saw the haggard, pale face and the bruises, scratch marks on his forehead. The nightmare night at the Hawthorne Hotel had left indelible marks on his body and in his mind, and to this day, John can still never forget that nightmare night at the Hawthorne Hotel. Every time night falls, he is haunted by the dark shapes, the strange noises, the invisible hands, and the horrific face in the mirror. He never dares to komandarovka to Hawthorne again, and he always advises everyone to stay away from the Hawthorne Hotel, because there, not only are there dark secrets, but there are also supernatural forces waiting to devour anyone who dares to venture near. Do you believe in this story? Perhaps you might think that it's just a fictional ghost story, but there are places, there are hotels, carrying within them secrets and curses that science cannot explain. The Hawthorne Hotel might be one of them. And remember that sometimes a business trip is not just work, but can also turn into a terrifying journey to hell if you are not careful and stray into places you should not go. Story 4. Phantom by the Merrimack River, Massachusetts. Halloween night 1998. It was 1998. A chilly Halloween night in Massachusetts. The air filled with the scent of fallen maple leaves and wood-burning stoves. The town of Newburyport, renowned for its ancient beauty and captivating historical tales. Yet few knew that, on that Halloween night, this town witnessed a horrific event at a desolate campsite by the Merrimack River, a river carrying within it chilling legends. This story tells of Jessica, a young girl who loved adventure, and her close group of friends. Michael, Ashley, and Brian, 4 friends, decided to organize a Halloween night camping trip by the Merrimack River near Newburyport to seek a novel experience and challenge their courage. Jessica, who was fond of the mysterious and gruesome, she had heard many stories about the Merrimack River, about mysterious drowning accidents, about wandering ghosts around the riverbank, and she wanted to witness firsthand whether those stories were true or not. Halloween afternoon, the group packed tents, food, and drinks into Michael's SUV. The atmosphere in the car was lively. The sound of laughter echoed, mixed with eerie Halloween music, playing from a portable speaker. They drove towards the campsite, nestled deep within a riverside forest, far from downtown Newburyport. When they arrived, dusk had already fallen. The twilight dyed the sky red. The leafless trees, barren, stretched up against the gray sky. The wind blew strongly, carrying the sound of rustling dry leaves, and the rushing river. The desolate and somewhat gloomy scenery only heightened the group's curiosity. The campsite was more deserted than they imagined. Not a soul in sight, only a few old picnic tables and rusty grills scattered among the trees. They chose an empty patch of land near the riverbank to set up camp. The sound of hammering tent pegs, the snapping of twigs, echoed in the silent forest. When night fell completely, the campsite was immersed in darkness. Only the flickering campfire cast light on the youthful faces, eagerly preparing for this special Halloween night. They grilled sausages, told ghost stories, and drank beer, as usual. But the atmosphere tonight felt different than usual. Ashley, the most sensitive girl in the group, began to feel something was wrong. She said, in a soft voice, "I have a feeling like someone is watching us from that forest over there." Brian laughed dismissively. "Don't imagine things, Ashley. There's no one here, only ghosts." Michael chimed in. "That's right. Probably the Merrimack River ghosts are coming to play Halloween with us." "Just kidding." The whole group burst out laughing, except for Jessica. She remained silent, observing her surroundings. The campfire suddenly flared up higher, then abruptly went out. Darkness descended unexpectedly. Laughter ceased. Only the howling wind and the river's roar echoed back. In the dark night, that sound sounded truly gruesome and terrifying. Michael quickly relit the fire, but this time, the fire wouldn't catch. He muttered, "That's weird. Why won't the fire light?" Jessica took out a flashlight and shone it around. The flashlight beam was weak, only enough to illuminate a small area. Darkness seemed thicker, enveloping them in the dim flashlight beam. Brian suddenly realized something was off. He said, his voice trembling, "Guys, do you see that? It seems we're surrounded." Ashley also panicked. "That's right. I feel it too. All around us is just darkness. I can't see a way out anymore." Michael still tried to appear calm. Don't overreact. It's just darkness. What's so scary about it? Quote, but Jessica didn't think so. She felt an invisible presence was surrounding them, not just darkness, but something darker, more terrifying, was gradually tightening the ring around them. The sound of the river suddenly became louder, more violent, as if the river was raging. Strange noises began to appear from the forest, the sound of branches breaking with a snap, the rustling of leaves, heavy footsteps, as if someone was approaching from all directions. The whole group listened in silence, hearts pounding in their chests, cold sweat pouring down their foreheads. Fear spread rapidly in the air, thick and stifling. Ashley trembled and asked, "Is anyone there? Anyone? Answer me." No one answered. Only the howling wind and the river's roar replied to her, echoing back in the silent night. Then, a sound, horrifying, rang out, tearing through the silent night. A heart-wrenching scream of pain echoed back from the forest. That scream lingered, then fell silent, leaving behind a silence more terrifying tenfold. Everyone froze solid. No one dared to breathe heavily. No one dared to move. They knew that something bad, horrifying, had happened, and it was very close to them, right in the forest, surrounding them. Jessica tried to regain her composure. She said, her voice trembling, We have to leave here. Right now." Everyone agreed immediately. No one wanted to stay in this ghostly campsite for another second. They hastily packed up their tents, belongings, hands and feet trembling. Flashlight beams shone erratically in the darkness. They tried to find their way back to the car, but it seemed they were lost in this dense and dark forest. The forest became different. The trees seemed taller, more menacing. Darkness thicker, enveloping them. No escape. The howling wind, like the lamenting cries of wronged spirits. The river's roar, like the growls of a giant monster. Footsteps continued to sound behind them, getting closer, faster, as if someone was chasing them, determined not to let go. Heavy gasps for breath, rustling sounds of twigs, dry leaves under the hunters' feet made the group's fear reach its peak. They started to ran for their lives through the dense forest. Thorns scratched at their skin, tripped, scrambled to get up, and kept running in the pitch-black darkness. They didn't know where they were running to. They only knew that they had to run, had to escape this place before it was too late. While running, Ashley tripped on a root and fell. She shouted, "Help me!" Brian turned back to help Ashley. But at that very moment, something from above swooped down and struck Brian hard. A horrific scream rang out again, then went silent. Ashley recoiled in horror. Her flashlight beam shone on the spot where Brian had fallen. But Brian was nowhere to be seen. Only a pool of fresh blood, crimson red, spreading on the damp ground. Ashley screamed in terror. "Brian! Where's Brian? Someone help Brian!" No one answered. Only the howling wind and the river's roar echoed back, as if mocking her helplessness and despair. Michael gritted his teeth. His face turned pale. He knew that they were facing something not human, but a supernatural, evil force, wanting to kill them, one by one. He said, his voice filled with resentment, "We can't keep running away forever. We have to fight back. We have to face it." Jessica shook her head vehemently. She knew that they had no chance to fight against such an invisible force. But Michael didn't listen to Jessica. He picked up a large piece of wood and held it defensively and shouted loudly, "I'm not afraid of you. What are you? Show yourself to me." Michael's shout echoed back in the silent forest, but nothing happened. Darkness still enveloped everything. Silence remained as terrifying as before. Suddenly, from above, a sound rang out like tearing wind. Something swooped down with terrifying speed, heading straight for Michael. He didn't have time to react, only managed to scream once, then fell to the ground, unconscious. Jessica and Ashley watched in horror as Michael lay motionless on the ground. They knew that Michael had also been defeated. Their fate was no better. Ashley wailed, No way. Michael, Brian, why is this happening? What did we do wrong?" Jessica hugged Ashley tightly, trying to comfort her, but she herself was in despair more than ever. Only two girls remained, alone and terrified, in the haunted forest. They knew that their chances of survival were extremely slim, but they still had to try. Had to find a way out of this place, even if it was just a sliver of hope. They helped each other to their feet, continued to run, running in vain, not knowing where to go. Tears, mixed with sweat, soaked their faces. Their hearts felt like breaking from pain and fear. Suddenly, in front of them, appeared a narrow path, like an escape route, amidst the dense forest. They rejoiced, like drowning people clutching at straws. Hastily ran along that path, hoping it would lead them out of this ghostly forest. But the path became increasingly winding, leading them deeper into the forest, rather than leading them out. Darkness, thicker, enveloping them. Strange noises continued to follow, getting closer and more terrifying. Jessica had a premonition that something was wrong. She stopped, said, "Ashley, I think we're going the wrong way. This path isn't leading us out, but is leading us deeper into the forest." Ashley stared blankly at Jessica. She was too tired and scared, no longer had the strength to think or decide anything. But Jessica still decided. She said, "We have to turn back. We can't keep going on this path." Ashley also agreed. The two girls turned back, walked back along the path, with the faint hope of finding an escape. But when they just turned back, the path suddenly disappeared, without a trace, as if it had never existed. In front of them only remained dense forest and darkness, vast, endless. Jessica and Ashley were completely desperate. They knew that they were trapped in this forest, no way out, no hope left. Only darkness and death were waiting for them. From within the darkness, a voice echoed, whispered, gruesome, as if from hell, "You cannot escape. Merrimack River." That voice got closer and closer, as if right beside them, whispering in their ears, making the two girls tremble to the bone. Then, from behind them, a dark shape gradually emerged, tall, distorted, faintly visible in the dim light. That dark shape was no longer an invisible dark shape, but had revealed its true form. A hideous, disgusting creature. It was tall, pitch black, skull-headed, with red eyes, like fire, and long sharp fangs, like daggers. Its body, covered in fur, slimy, and reeking of a terrible stench. That creature growled, approached the two girls. It raised its sharp claws, preparing to attack. Jessica and Ashley knew that this was their final moment. They closed their eyes, waiting for death to come to them. But at that very moment, from afar, a police car siren rang out, tearing through the silent night. Car headlights flashed through the trees, dispelling the darkness and terror. The hideous creature seemed to be frightened by the light. It roared angrily, then vanished into the darkness. Jessica and Ashley opened their eyes, looked around. The creature had truly disappeared. Only remained the police car headlights approaching, and the siren continued to echo. In the forest, they knew that they had been saved. They had escaped the deadly hand of the Merrimack River. But what they had experienced this nightmare Halloween night would forever haunt them for the rest of their lives. Police found Jessica and Ashley in a state of exhaustion and panic. They recounted the horrific story they had just experienced, but the police did not believe their words, believing that they were just hallucinating due to excessive fear. However, when the police conducted a search in the forest, they found the bodies of Michael and Brian with strange wounds, inexplicable, on their bodies. And around the campsite, there were many strange footprints, not of humans or any animals that the police knew. The case became an unsolved mystery. Police could not find the culprit who caused the deaths of Michael and Brian, and could not explain the strange phenomena that Jessica and Ashley had recounted. The campsite by the Merrimack River was closed down permanently. No one dared to venture near it anymore. People rumored that that forest was haunted by the souls of those drowned in the Merrimack River, and the monster that killed Michael and Brian was still lurking in the darkness, waiting for the next prey. Do you believe in this story? Perhaps you might think that it's just a far-fetched ghost story. But there are places, there are rivers, carrying within them secrets and curses that we can never understand. The Merrimack River, perhaps, is one of them. And remember that Halloween night is not always a joyful and bustling night. Sometimes it can turn into a nightmare and bloody night if you are not careful and stray into places where demons roam. Story 5. Knocking in the Empty Office, New York. Winter night 2008. It was 2008. A freezing winter night in New York. The city that never sleeps was still bustling with lights. But on the 13th floor of the Harrington and Sons office building, on Madison Avenue, everything was eerily silent. Only darkness remained, and strange sounds echoed from the empty hallways. This story tells of Emily, a young, ambitious girl, working diligently in the accounting department of Harrington and Sons. She always wanted to prove herself, and that night, she decided to stay late to finish an important project ahead of schedule. Emily knew that working late at the office was not something too unusual. Many of her colleagues also often stayed overtime, but tonight, there was a different feeling enveloping her, a feeling of unease, indescribable, as if someone was watching her from the darkness. Around 7 p.m., when almost everyone had left, Emily was still working diligently in her private office. The 13th floor, already deserted in the evening, now became even more silent. The sound of the keyboard clacking, the rustling of papers, seemed to echo more in the quiet space. Suddenly, The lights in the office flickered continuously, then went out. The entire room plunged into darkness. Emily startled, her heart pounding. She quickly turned on the desk lamp. The faint yellow light shone on her face. Pale, in the dark, she muttered to herself, "Power outage again. This building always has problems." But, deep inside, she felt something was not right. Power outages rarely happened at the Harrington and Sons building. And usually, it was just a local outage, not a floor-wide blackout like this. Emily stood up, stepped out of the office, looked into the hallway. The hallway was pitch black, not a light on, only dim light filtering through the window at the end of the hallway, overlooking the city. The dark night outside made the hallway even more terrifying. She called security, but no one answered. She tried calling her colleagues, but they had all turned off their phones. Emily felt completely alone and isolated in this large and deserted office building. She decided to go downstairs to see what was going on. She stepped out into the hallway, walked towards the elevators, but as she approached the elevators, she realized the elevators had stopped working. The indicator lights were completely off, as if the entire electrical system had been paralyzed. Emily sighed. With no other choice, she had to take the stairs. The stairwell was at the end of the hallway, hidden behind a heavy steel door. That door, usually, always stood wide open, but today, it was tightly shut, as if trying to hide something scary. Inside, she pushed open the steel door, stepped into the stairwell. A gust of cold, damp air rushed over her. The smell of mildew and dust, pungent, rushed straight into her nose, making her feel uneasy and shiver. The stairwell was pitch black, not a light on, only faint light filtered through the window slits, shining on the old and slippery stone steps. Emily's footsteps echoed back in the silent space, sounding truly lonely and terrifying. When she had gone down a few floors, Emily began to hear strange sounds echoing up from below. Footsteps, slow, heavy, as if someone was walking up the stairs. From below, soft breaths, like groans of a sick person, struggling to climb each step. Emily stopped, held her breath to listen, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that no one was staying late, except for her, and maybe a few security guards. But those footsteps didn't sound like human footsteps, but like the footsteps of something heavier, slower, and more terrifying. She trembled and asked, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No one answered. Only footsteps continued to approach, heavier, and the soft breaths still echoed up from below, like a gruesome response. Emily felt goosebumps rising all over her body, cold sweat pouring down her forehead. Fear began to invade her mind. She had the feeling as if she was being hunted by something invisible and evil. In this dark and cold stairwell, she decided to go back to the 13th floor, not daring to go down anymore. She turned around, ran back up the stairs. But when she ran a few steps, she realized the footsteps had not disappeared, but continued to chase after her. From below, even faster and closer. Emily panicked, ran for her life up the stairs. Her heart felt like jumping out of her chest. Her breath came in gasps. The footsteps still followed closely behind, like a phantom, invisible, chasing her, determined not to let go. When she reached the 13th floor, Emily burst out of the stairwell, ran straight into her office, slammed the door shut, locked it, leaned her back against the door, panting, trying to calm down, but the fear still did not subside, but increased tenfold. She looked around the office. Everything was still the same. Nothing had changed, but the atmosphere in the room became heavier, more suffocating, as if someone was lurking in the darkness, observing her every move. The desk lamp suddenly flickered continuously, then went out. The room plunged into darkness again. Emily hastily turned on her phone flashlight, shone it around, but the flashlight's weak beam could not dispel the darkness, but only made it even more terrifying. In the dim darkness, Emily felt someone was in her room, not one person, but many people. She could hear soft breaths, rustling sounds, stirring sounds, as if someone was moving around her. In the darkness, suddenly, a knock on the door rang out, softly but firmly, making Emily jump. Her heart, as if stopped beating. She held her breath to listen. The knock on the door rang out again and again, becoming more and more insistent and louder. Emily trembled and asked, "Who is it? Who's knocking?" No one answered. Only the knock on the door continued to ring out, steadily and terrifyingly, like a call to souls from hell. She tried to calm down, walked to the door, her hand trembling, touched the doorknob, but just as she was about to open the door, the knock on the door abruptly stopped, fell silent. She opened the door. The hallway outside remained pitch black, deserted, not a soul in sight. She looked around, not seeing anyone, only darkness and silence enveloped her. She closed the door, locked it, backed away, leaned against the wall, panting. She knew that she was not safe at all. In this office, there was something very scary, wanting to harm her. As the night wore on, strange phenomena happened more and more. In the office and outside the hallway, sounds of furniture falling, rustling of papers, whispers, giggles, all of it echoed back in the dark night, as if mocking Emily's fear. The light from the computer screen suddenly flickered continuously, then went out. The screen turned black, reflecting back Emily's pale, haggard face. In the darkness, she shuddered when she saw that face, the face of someone terrified beyond measure. Suddenly, from behind her, a sound echoed softly, then gradually louder. Footsteps, slow, heavy, rang out again, but this time, those footsteps were not echoing from the stairwell, but echoing from right inside her office. From behind her, Emily panicked, spun around, looking behind her. In the dim darkness, she saw a dark shape gradually emerged, tall, distorted, faintly visible in the flashlight beam. That dark shape had no clear form. It was just a black mass, huge, approaching her, slowly and terrifyingly. Emily's heart, as if stopped beating. She wanted to scream, but her throat constricted, unable to make a sound. She wanted to run away, but her legs were as if rooted to the ground, unable to move. She felt her whole body paralyzed, without any strength. The dark shape came closer and closer. It emitted a strange sound, gruesome, like groans, growls, gasps for breath, mixed together. That sound was like echoing from hell, making Emily feel terrified beyond measure. When the dark shape came very close to her, Emily could see more clearly its form. It was not a human, but a bizarre, hideous creature. It was tall, pitch black, without a face, only long tentacles, wriggling, reaching out from its body. Those tentacles, trembling, slimy, and emitting a weird, bluish-green light. That creature raised its tentacles, reaching towards Emily. Those tentacles touched her face, her neck, her hands, cold, slimy, and disgusting. Emily felt as if thousands of leeches were crawling on her body, sucking her blood, gnawing at her flesh. Emily screamed in terror, struggling, trying to escape the disgusting tentacles. But the more she struggled, those tentacles tightened even more. They squeezed her body, making her feel suffocated and in pain. She felt her consciousness was gradually blurring and vanishing. In her dying moments, Emily suddenly remembered the ghost stories she had once heard about the Harrington and Sons building, about mysterious workplace accidents, about wronged spirits wandering in this building. She suddenly realized that she was not the first person, and perhaps also not the last person, to become a victim of the evil forces lurking in the darkness of this office building. Do you believe in this story? Perhaps you might think that it's just a fictional ghost story. But there are places, there are buildings, carrying within them secrets and curses that we can never explain. The Harrington and Sons building, perhaps, is one of them. And remember that working overtime at the office is not always safe and peaceful. Sometimes it can turn into a nightmare and terrifying night if you are not careful and stray into places you should not go, especially at night.